In a family forged by ambition, where loyalty is a currency and trust a battlefield, betrayal can unravel even the mightiest empire. This is the story of Andrew Bennett, the overlooked son, whose quiet strength became a weapon against those who sought to erase him. Welcome to a tale where greed builds thrones, but vengeance topples them. The day my father died, the sky over Boston was a heavy, dull gray. Not the dramatic storm of novels, but a suffocating shroud that pressed down on the Bennett family mansion. The silence inside wasn't grief. It was anticipation, sharp and calculating, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the will to be read. Richard Bennett, my father, had been a titan, transforming a crumbling construction firm into Massachusetts' largest private enterprise. But he'd also turned our family into a crucible, pitting us against each other in a relentless game of worth. Competition breeds strength, he'd say, his voice a commandment, as if rivalry was our inheritance. I was Andrew, the middle child, neither the brilliant eldest Matthew, who mirrored Dad's ruthless ambition, nor the radiant youngest Lila, whose charm made her everyone's darling. I was the steady one, the unseen engine of Bennett Construction, working late nights, untangling financial knots, keeping the company alive while Matthew chased headlines and Lila flitted through her whims. I didn't seek the spotlight. I thought Dad saw my value in the shadows. I was wrong. In the mahogany-paneled study, the air thick with cigar smoke and old leather, the lawyer's voice droned, his hands steady on the will. To my beloved children, he read, I divide my legacy as follows. I gripped my chair, not greedy, but expecting fairness after years of loyalty. Matthew sat back, his smirk already claiming victory. Lila twirled her hair, feigning indifference, her eyes bright with expectation. The words landed like blows. To my son Matthew, I leave controlling interest in Bennett Construction. The crown jewel, his to wield. To my daughter Lila, I leave the family estate and its assets. The Boston mansion, the Cape Cod retreat, the millions behind the facade. And to my son, Andrew. My pulse pounded, hope flickering. I leave a trust of $50,000, for his discretion. The room spun, my ears ringing. 50,000. A pittance against the millions handed to my siblings. I stared at the lawyer, waiting for a correction, a mistake, shares, a roll, something. But he folded the papers, his gaze averted. Matthew's smirk widened, sharp as a blade. Lila's lips curved, a half-hearted apology that didn't reach her eyes. The room filled with relatives and partners, their pitying glances like salt in the wound. I pushed through them, escaping to the veranda, the November chill biting my skin. Matthew followed, lighting a cigar with casual arrogance. Tough break, Andrew, he said, exhaling smoke into the gray sky. Dad always knew you weren't cut for the top. My fists clenched, knuckles white. You think this is a game? He shrugged, his smile cruel. Not a game. Just reality. You're the worker bee, not the king. You knew, I said, my voice breaking. His eyes glinted. Dad and I talked for years. He wanted a leader, not support staff. The words cut deeper than the will. Matthew hadn't just known, he'd orchestrated it, whispering in Dad's ear, turning my loyalty into a liability. And Lila, Dad's princess, hadn't needed to scheme. Her charm secured her throne. The betrayal was surgical, and I'd been blind to the knife. That night, in a guest room stripped of my childhood, I lay awake, the ceiling a canvas for my rage. $50,000 for a decade of sleepless nights, of saving the company from Matthew's reckless deals, of being the son Dad could rely on. I could have walked away, taken the money, started over. But Matthew's smirk, Lila's pitying glance, the legacy they were already dismantling, it fueled something new. Not grief, but resolve. They wanted war? I'd give them one. The next morning, I went to the office. My office, where I'd kept Bennett Construction running while Matthew played visionary. Whispers followed me, colleagues' eyes heavy with sympathy. Matthew was already there, in Dad's chair, his chair, feet propped on the desk, papers scattered like a conqueror's map. You're not supposed to be here, he said, not looking up. This is my job, I replied, my voice steady. Not anymore, he said, meeting my eyes with a cold smile. Board's restructuring. I'm taking operations. You'll figure something out. The final cut, delivered with relish. I wanted to append the desk, to shatter his smugness. But rage is a poor weapon. Instead, I saw his mistake. Matthew thought he'd won. Lila thought her crown was secure. But empires fall when their foundations are weak, and I knew there's better than anyone. That night, I dug into old files, contracts, financials, emails. Matthew was careless, chasing flashy deals with shaky numbers. Lila was vain, her estate and galas funded by a fortune she didn't understand. They thought they'd erased me. But I knew their secrets, their cracks, their buried lies. And I wasn't afraid to unearth them. I didn't rage or beg when Matthew dismissed me from the company I'd kept afloat. That's what he wanted, a broken Andrew, pleading for scraps, proving his narrative that I was nothing but a cog. Instead, I nodded, my face a mask of defeat, and left his office quietly, my steps measured. Silence was my first weapon, and I wielded it like a blade. My next move was to watch, to study the empire Matthew thought he'd won. He thrived on risky ventures, glossy skyscrapers and waterfront developments that dazzled in headlines but had shaky foundations. Dad had always cleaned up his messes, but Dad was gone. In my cramped Boston apartment, I pored over files I'd copied over the years, financials, contracts, emails. A pattern emerged, projects half-built, funded by loans funneled through shell companies, contractors overpaid, linked to Matthew's cronies, investors promised returns that didn't exist. Bennett Construction wasn't his empire, it was his house of cards, waiting for a gust. Exposing him outright was too simple. I wanted Matthew to fall publicly, his arrogance laid bare for all to see. So I played the fool. The next week, I returned to the office, my smile meek, my voice soft. Anything I can do to help? I asked Matthew, leaning against his doorframe. He smirked, his benevolence a performance. Andrew, I admire your grit, but there's no role for you now. The board's with me. For the family, I said, my tone earnest. Dad wanted us united. He laughed, sharp and dismissive. Dad wanted winners. Stay out of my way. Perfect. His arrogance was my leverage, handing me the rope to hang him with. Lila was simpler to unravel. She'd inherited the family estate, the Boston mansion, the Cape Cod retreat, the accounts Dad had filled. But she didn't know how to manage them. Her galas, charity balls, and curated Instagram posts burned through cash like kindling. I watched her, noting every crack. Creditors called at odd hours, bank statements showed overdrawn accounts, property taxes piled up, unpaid. She was drowning in her own excess, and I was content to let her sink. One evening, she called, her voice trembling, not the golden child who'd smirked at the will reading. Andrew, can we talk? In person. I met her at the estate, its grandeur fading, dark rooms to save on electricity, half the staff gone. She poured us wine, a cheap red she'd once mocked me for drinking. Matthew's cut me out, she whispered, her eyes darting. He promised we'd share the profits, but he's hoarding everything. I can't keep up. For a moment, pity flickered, she looked so small, so lost. Then I saw her at the will reading, her silence complicit as Dad's legacy was stolen from me. You'll manage, I said, my voice cold, setting the glass down untouched. Her face tightened, unused to rejection. The first crack in her crown had formed. My sabotage was subtle, a whisper campaign in the office. I lingered in break rooms, dropped hints to mid-level managers about unpaid invoices, murmured about risky projects. Double-check the numbers, I'd say casually. We don't want surprises. The whispers grew, a ripple turning to a wave. Investors began asking questions, subcontractors demanded cash up front, rumors of instability spread, each one a seed I'd planted. Matthew didn't notice at first, too busy posing for press as the visionary leader. But soon, his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic, a man sensing the ground shift beneath him. The turning point came in the archives. Buried in old files was a project Dad had killed, a Chicago skyscraper, too costly, too risky. Matthew had revived it, secretly, using company assets as collateral. The numbers were catastrophic, millions hemorrhaged, with no returns in sight. If it failed, it wouldn't just ruin Matthew, it would sink Bennett Construction. I closed the file, my pulse steady, a smile forming. This was the weapon, the key to his downfall. But timing was critical. Too soon, and the board might bury it. Too late, and the company would collapse before the world saw his guilt. Lila's unraveling accelerated. She threw another gala, a desperate bid to maintain her facade, the estate glittering with borrowed light. I attended, blending into the crowd, watching her laugh too loudly, her champagne glass trembling. Guests whispered about unpaid staff, mortgaged properties, her shine dimming. In a quiet corner, she grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Andrew, please," she pleaded. "You're the smart one. Help me fix this." For years, she'd never seen me, never needed me. Now, she begged. I leaned close, my voice a whisper. "You should have thought of that before you took my share." Her eyes widened, her face crumpling as I walked away, leaving her to her gilded ruin. The walls were closing in. Matthew juggled failing projects and furious investors, his charm cracking. Lila suffocated under the weight of her estate, her accounts bleeding dry. I waited, calm, my plan sharpening. Revenge isn't a scream, it's a scalpel, cutting clean and deep. Then, the final piece fell into place. A late-night email, a mistake, someone CC'd me on a confidential thread. Proof of Matthew's fraud, forged signatures on loan documents, inflated numbers to secure millions. Felony-level deceit, laid bare. I leaned back, the screen's glow reflecting my smile. His empire was crumbling, and I held the final push. That night, I poured a whiskey, standing by my window as Boston's skyline glittered below. For the first time in months, I felt weightless. Matthew and Lila thought they'd won, but their thrones were sand. Soon they'd fall, not by chance, but by my hand. The reckoning came faster than I'd planned. Matthew called an emergency shareholder meeting at a Boston hotel, a desperate bid to quiet the whispers of instability at Bennett Construction. He wanted to project strength, to convince investors the empire was unshaken. I knew the truth, his throne was crumbling, and I was ready to topple it. The ballroom glittered with wealth, suits, champagne, polite applause. Cameras lined the walls, local press drawn by Matthew's promise of big news. He took the stage in Dad's old cufflinks, his smile a king's mask, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "my father built Bennett Construction on vision, trust, and family. I'm here to assure you, his legacy thrives under my leadership." The crowd clapped, but I saw the cracks, sweat beading at his collar, his fingers twitching. He was unraveling, and I held the thread. The Q&A began, investors probing gently at first, late payments, stalled projects. Matthew deflected with charm. "Minor hiccups," he said, waving a hand. "Strategic growth takes time." I stood, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Matthew," I said, calm and clear, "if we're discussing legacy, let's talk about Chicago." The air stilled. His smile froze. "Chicago?" he repeated, his voice tight. I stepped forward, a folder in hand, my pulse steady. "The skyscraper project Dad cancelled. The one you revived, secretly, using company assets as collateral. The one bleeding millions." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes narrowing. Matthew's face drained of color. "That's a lie," he snapped, his voice cracking. I opened the folder, papers crisp and damning. "These financials say otherwise. Emails. Contracts. Forged signatures." I placed the documents on the table, the thud echoing. Cameras flashed, reporters surging forward. The room erupted, shouts of forgery, fraud, questions piling like stones. Matthew stammered, his charm dissolving. "It's fake. He's bitter, jealous." But the board members leaned together, their faces grim, phones already buzzing with calls. Lila rose, her designer heels wobbling, her voice shrill. "This is family business," she pleaded. "Let's not overreact." An investor cut her off, his voice sharp. "And you, Lila? The estate's in foreclosure, isn't it? Parties, debts, where's the legacy in that?" Her face flushed, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. The cameras turned, ravenous, her golden image burning under their glare. She sank into her seat, the crowd's whispers, fraud, ruin, swallowing her whole. The meeting collapsed into chaos. Investors stormed out, demanding audits. Reporters shouted questions, their lenses trained on Matthew's unraveling composure. The board announced an immediate investigation, their voices cold. Matthew staggered off the stage, his face ashen, his empire slipping through his fingers. He found me near the exit, his voice a low snarl. You did this. You destroyed everything. I met his gaze, my voice ice. No, Matthew. You built this disaster. I just turned on the light. For once, he had no retort, no smirk, just a hollow stare as I walked away. The fallout was merciless. Within days, Bennett Construction imploded. Projects were frozen, banks called in loans, lawsuits piled like wreckage. The Chicago project triggered a federal probe, fraud, forgery, criminal charges. Matthew's name, once synonymous with ambition, became a byword for scandal. Headlines screamed, Bennett heir faces fraud charges. Family empire crumbles in forgery scandal. I read each one, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. Lila's fall was quieter but no less brutal. The estate was auctioned, mansion, cars, art, all sold to cover debts. Her so-called friends vanished, their invitations drying up. I saw her once, leaving a bank, her hair limp, her eyes sunken. She looked ordinary, stripped of her glow, invisible at last. I passed her without a word, her shadow no longer mine to bear. I didn't claim the company or fight for the estate. I didn't need them. Dad's legacy wasn't in towers or wealth, it was resilience, the quiet strength to endure. I'd reclaimed that, and it was enough. One evening, I sat on the porch of my modest South End home, Boston's skyline fading into twilight. Peace settled over me, not from money or fame, but from justice. Matthew and Lila had stolen my inheritance, but I'd taken something greater, their illusions, their power, their names. The scales were balanced. Thus ends Bloodline of Greed, a tale of a son who turned betrayal into retribution, proving that the quiet ones wield the sharpest blades. Stay tuned for more stories where greed builds empires, and vengeance tears them down.